Welcome to Season 2 of the To Health With That podcast, where we break up big health topics into small bites. I'm Amy, and this season I'll share all the tips, tricks, and hacks you need to get healthy with an MTHFR mutation in a step-by-step, week-by-week process. I can't wait. This week, we're going to talk about patience on the MTHFR journey. Now, I'm pretty sure this is the most frustrating part of the whole MTHFR shebang. Not the crazy symptoms, the issues if we take too much methylfolate, the dietary changes, or the problems we have from MTHFR in the first place, but the tooth-grindingly frustrating requirement for patience. You may have gathered that I'm not a very patient person. My nature is to rush headlong into everything, consequences be damned. It's actually a family trait. My grandfather once rear-ended a moving vehicle on the highway because they just weren't going fast enough. Of course, both vehicles were land yachts, as this was the norm at that time, so the worst that came of it was a very startled driver in the other car. My mother physically can't stand still, and if there are more than two people standing in one place, then it's a line, and none of my family are interested. Interestingly, this is a trait that I believe is shared with many MTHFR folks, which always makes me question whether the universe actually is some giant cosmic joke, a huge gotcha situation in which every human is required to muscle through the tasks that are the hardest for them as individuals to tolerate. It certainly seems to be the case with MTHFR because so many of us like to push forward and push through, and in general, we're very capable of doing so. MTHFR folks usually fall into two categories, or basic states. These are over-methylators and under-methylators. If you don't remember what I'm talking about, this is the MTHFR basic state and represents the two sides of the MTHFR coin. Both faces of this coin have many commonalities, but the differences come down to whether your body likely over-methylates your DNA or under-methylates it. Another way to look at the whole thing is by looking at histamine levels. Both sides of this coin have a lot of reactions to the outside world, but under-methylators react in a high histamine way, so classic hay fever, sneezing, hives, watery nose, itchy eyes, while over-methylators react in a low histamine way. Think constantly blocked nose, allergy headaches, muscle pains, chemical sensitivities. This idea was first proposed and researched by Dr. Walsh of the Walsh Research Institute. To brush up on the basics, there's a link in the show notes to Season 1, Episode 16, on MTHFR basic states. So over-methylating MTHFR folks are known to push themselves through all manner of agony for their passion project of the moment. Typically, it's some kind of activism, some sort of making the world better, something that helps others, or an art form that they're offering to the world. It could be a skill taken to the level of an art form, or anything these amazing MTHFR folks choose to push forward. Over-methylators, you'll recall, tend to excel at the things they're interested in, and the rest of it can go hang. These are the brilliant children whose parents don't understand how they can know and comprehend every map, level, move, and function in a complex video game, but won't learn to read. These MTHFR folks aren't concerned with doing well at everything, but they will go above and beyond at the things that interest them, at the expense of eating, sleeping, or anything else while they're in the flow of their work or interest. As a whole, patience is not the watchword here. Sadly, patience isn't something that under-methylators do either. Under-methylators are perfectionists and overachievers, and they make up about 45% of the population. There are also people who are methylation neutral, but generally if you have an MTHFR mutation, you tend not to be. Under-methylators are the people who will push themselves until they collapse to be the best at whatever it is they do, but at everything else too. They're the prima ballerinas, the professional athletes, the CEOs, and the people who generally push until they are the best that they can be at everything they do. They're typically perfectionists and high achievers, and they expect themselves to excel at everything. As you can see, both of these groups push forward no matter what, and that typically doesn't involve patience. But in this game, patience is actually the essence of what is needed. Why? Why so much patience? Well, simply because we're dealing with a pathway with MTHFR that is inherently compromised, and that pathway is responsible for so many things, but the pathway itself is utterly dependent on a couple of key nutrients. So it creates a situation in which there's a mountain of pressure in all of those responsibilities that the pathway has to carry out on a very narrow platform of nutrients. In short, it's a situation that can get messy in a heartbeat. I think far less patience would be required if we all started managing our methylation at birth. Babies would be raised with all of the good active methylfolate that they need. The other B vitamins would be available too, so that there wasn't a chance for this slightly compromised system to create a backlog of unfinished business. Most of us, however, have not been raised like that. Most of us have a good 20, 40, even 60 years of backlog built up before we actually figure out that there's even an issue with MTHFR. So we need patience. Changes must be made slowly for a few reasons. Number 1, if you make too many changes at once, then you can't tell what's doing what. So if you have any kind of a reaction, good or bad, you don't know what to link it to. So confusing. If you make a great change, like adding 5-LMTHF, but do too much too quickly, you can get into a super scary too high a dose symptom picture, which mostly feels like you could peel the paint off your walls just by looking at them hard enough. It's not fun, and it usually makes people give up methylfolate forever, or at least for a few years until they get brave enough to try it again. And reason 3. If you make a conservative change, like adding a small dose of 5-LMTHF, but then don't wait for your body to settle in to be ready for the next step, then you can kind of inch into that massive symptom territory again. Essentially, the MTHFR journey is like walking a very long boardwalk through a crocodile-infested swamp. You want to stay on the path and not veer off into the muck. There be dragons. I know that everyone listening wants the next step, right now. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. I know that. But the next step is actually waiting to see how you feel without folic acid in your diet and with the addition of food sources of natural folate. It's symptom tracking. I know, boring. Wah, wah. Some of you won't notice too much, and that's okay. Some will notice an improvement, and that's a great sign that you'll be able to take the next steps post-haste. This tends to be over-methylators who typically tolerate 5-LMTHF reasonably well. A few will notice that without the folic acid, things were looking brighter, but adding foods high in folate doesn't seem to work for them. Or it makes them worse. In fact, some of you might have already known that none of the high folate foods that I've mentioned work for you at all. This could be an indication that you're not going to tolerate folate. And that's okay. Think of this as an early warning system. We will, eventually, try to add in a tiny dose of 5-LMTHF. But the red flags are already up. We know, in this scenario, to take it extra slow and watch for bad reactions. Thanks for listening today, and just as a heads up, I am trying to figure out how to launch a Patreon page, because I love making this podcast, and I want to put out as much free information for MTHFR folks to be able to take advantage of as I can. There's some of you who may have some extra resources that you'd like to donate to see this show continue, and I would appreciate it so much. I'd be delighted if you could contribute a bit. My page isn't live yet, but it will be by next week. So I tell myself. So, stay tuned. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.